Hey everybody, welcome back to the SCIF. We are shifting from our public released episode on the WNBA and Dildo Gate over to a more serious topic here, but I'm trying to shake off the lulls from the last one. So forgive me, but we do have to discuss something very serious. It is everywhere. I think it's an important part of the social fabric. We're talking about the situation in Gaza when it comes to the starvation blockade and the results of a lot of the underlying dialogue that's happening here. Really excited to dig into this, though, because this is super, super important that people figure out what's going on so that we can engage on it appropriately. My name is David Random here with Joe Sheehan. How you doing, Joe?
I'm doing great, David. Thank you for being here. And thank you guys at home for watching and listening wherever you are. Please like and subscribe to the show. And if you're on YouTube, hit that notification bell so you don't miss an episode. And we'd love your comments as well. The comments tremendously help the algorithm. So let us know in the comments below this video what you think of this story as it unfolds. David, why don't you lay it out for us?
So the top of it, we're going to be talking about a lot of the stuff around this, but the top of it is a new Gallup poll came out this week that shows 32% in the U.S. back Israel's actions in Gaza. This is a new low. Interesting. Of course, the only remaining support really is amongst Republicans. Unfortunately, Gaza did not do a demographic breakdown of that support. But what we've seen from other polls so far is it's largely the younger, more conservative crowd is moving away, and that's eroding total support amongst Republicans. But a new low for Republicans, sub 50 on Israel, is a big deal. And what we're looking at here is really, the crumbling apart on, kind of like a pillar here of what makes America First happen is these young people who came on the podcast, train with Donald Trump, they're exiting the station right now, which doesn't mean they don't support Donald Trump, doesn't mean they don't support MAGA or America First, but does, at least in this policy, demonstrate some erosion of trust.
That's so interesting because it feels like there's been an all-out media push, at least from sort of the, perhaps the more Israel-focused side of the MAGA coalition. And, obviously the administration and everyone in it and around it seems to be really trying to push this narrative that Israel is our greatest ally, a tale we've been told for a very long time. But obviously it's not resonating with people. So like, what are the catalysts that have driven the young new MAGA members, Donald Trump voters, away from that view on this issue?
Well, I think it's the total atmosphere. But what happened this week, and then when I mean the total atmosphere, I'm everything from Candace Owens getting 2 to 4 million views on a video about this sort of stuff, talking to Dave Smith on Joe Rogan, to talking to, and Tucker Carlson and his work that he's been doing. It's really shaped, I think, a lot of this landscape. And additionally, that there's just less to pull from and like the normative basis for people's underlying values, right? So at the end of the day, I think there's a lot more cognitive resistance amongst older, more conservative voters about these things. There's a lot more religiosity, highly connected to dispensationalism amongst older Republican voters. That creates a tremendous amount of cognitive resistance to changing their views and a willingness to believe narratives that are tenuous, at best. Such as the Free Press put out an article yesterday saying there is no starvation of Gaza going on, that it's a myth. And when I go through the stats here in a little bit, I think they will demonstrate just how likely this myth is to be true. But what happened this week, I think that is really driving a big part of this, was Tucker Carlson had on U.S. Green Beret veteran Tony Aguilar, and he described his time contracting with UGS, which is a security firm that's subcontracted to the Gaza Humanitarian Aid Foundation. That's sitting at 1 million views on YouTube. That's, out of 4 million subscribers, it's a normal video for Tucker Carlson, but across all the different podcast mediums, not to mention on X, it's a big story, and it really hit large. And he was also on Breaking Points, and discussed the same thing. That's another couple million views amongst a wider demographic, but still a lot of young people viewing it. And it's, on the internet space, what we're really seeing as a consensus arising, they're like, hey, when they say that starvation is going on and I see the videos of it, I'm less likely to believe it's AI or some kind of, scam by the Hamas. When I see a U.S. Green Beret veteran a specialist in security forces and a specialist in how to deal with urban warfare, telling us that, no, this is real and there are serious implications here about American support because there are war crimes going on, according to him. So I do want to know, I do have a link here to play from Aguilar from that podcast with Tucker. I get this up here.
So tell us what you saw, and I'm grateful to your wife for her encouragement on that. I think she's absolutely right. The United States is paying for this, and there is almost no information coming out of Gaza. The news media, of course, are barred. It's been going on for more than a couple of years now. It'll be 3 years in October, and the sense is that there's something profound going on, but of course, there's no way to know what's going on. So, what did you see when you arrived? What were your perceptions of Gaza?
So my initial perceptions of Gaza, just in terms of the physical aspect, is that I would just describe it as post-apocalyptic, something from, the akin to Terminator 2, when the T-100s are walking through the destroyed landscape. It's human depravity. It's the oppression of dignity. It's the entire area, like for example, in the south in Rafah. I saw pictures of Rafah prior to the current war, and there were nice buildings, there were beach resorts, there were, street lights and neighborhoods, and now it is leveled to the ground. There is not a building that stands, and the rubble is piled up. And as you drive through Rafah to one of our points, secure distribution site number 3 was in Rafah. So we would have to drive through the old southern Rafah corridor to get there. And all of the homes just in piles and rubble. And you can see, someone's couch that's hanging from a piece of rebar out of the second floor of a building, or a refrigerator smashed, or family photos that were on the wall that are now, shattered and broken. Like, these lives were just destroyed and taken. And that's the scene of Gaza. As on the news, airdrops were conducted over the last 48 hours, and journalists were prohibited or encouraged not to take video or pictures of the overhead scenery. Because if the world sees that, I think the world would step back and pause to say, what are we doing? What have we become?
You've spent your life in combat zones. That's why I think your testimony is so compelling, because you have a frame of reference. You've seen a lot of destruction and a lot of killing in your life for 25 years. How would you compare what you saw?
Oh, yeah, just a little bit longer. Sorry, Joe. Yeah, but he basically says nothing compares to what he saw. Yeah, you're right. That testimony is really powerful because of who he is and where he's speaking from. Like, he's not some bleeding heart liberal who's always been an anti-war activist. No, he's a veteran Green Beret who served in Afghanistan and all over the world for the U.S. Army, who in retirement was recruited by this firm, went there, saw that, and then left and came back and to tell the American people about what's going on there.
Yeah, and this is a different interview than the one that I saw. Tucker had him on in person as well, and hearing his story about sort of the deception that's going on with what the Gaza Humanitarian Aid Foundation says they're doing versus what they're really doing, their lack of competence, and just the utter, inhumanity of the situation there is devastating to listen to.
Mm-hmm. And the reason why I came back on is because the blowback from this initial interview that we just saw from, where he really dives into much more of the specifics of what his, individual concerns are, was because there was a smear campaign that went on afterwards, basically claiming from all these other people who served at UGS, saying, in a sworn statement that he was fired and he's just like sour grapes or something like that. When that's not really the content of it. And in fact, in a lot of those, there's a lot of misstatements in the debunking of what he says. For example, and I watched both, and I looked at the content of all the accusations, comparing them to what he claims. And if you listen carefully, there's some pretty fine distinctions that are important. For example, at one section, he claims that the standard practice at these aid sites is to fire over the heads of people and at their feet, and that will kind of corral them. And he says, well, why didn't we just put up a sign to say go this way? And they say, well, it's cost too much. Not going to do that. Now, keep in mind, there are 4 aid sites. 4, right? So that's not that many signs, number one. Number two, there used to be 400 UN aid sites, but now they've only opened 4 for the beginning. And this is amongst, Gaza's not a big place, but it's, when you don't have a vehicle and all the infrastructure is ruined, it's difficult to get around, right? So you have, these millions of people who only have 4 aid sites for this entire population, and they're claiming, well, we're sending in more aid. But when you have this bottleneck, that is this process where they give aid twice a day and at these aid sites in the morning and the evening is what it sounds like. And it's just this giant rush with fire going over the heads, tank rounds going off, mortar shells going off in order to intimidate these people. Well, and then additionally, and this is anyone who knows anything about firearms, if you fire a bullet into the air, it lands someplace, right? If you fire it into the ground, it can ricochet. So if you're firing in the air in the dark, and he claims that a lot of these are these IDF forces are the reserve forces, the conscripted reserve forces. If they don't have night vision, you can't see where you're firing towards. You could have a blind, you could have a horizon line, and you're firing into that horizon line and killing people. And he's claiming that this right. is happening, and this is not. If you've been tracking this story on X and in other places over time, this all sounds, of course this is what's been happening. But I don't think this has really penetrated the American cultural sphere to understand that if you're firing into the air, of course you're going to hit people. And when it does hit people, of course, that intimidates people, keeps them from coming when they otherwise might to get aid. And then they come only when they're the most desperate. So you get the video and photographs of these crowds of emaciated people who are starving to death. And it just doesn't calculate, right? It doesn't make sense for if they're actually trying to produce aid. What they're trying, unless you overlay a theory of their motive, and we'll dig into that in a second. But it's very clear that the practices themselves are terrible for the people who are doing this. They're not doing this for aid; they're doing this for intimidation purposes, perhaps.
Right. Well, and additionally, if it were actually for aid, they would be supplying water, but in the more recent interview between Tony Aguilar and Tucker Carlson, he talks about how GHA is delivering truckloads of food, like mostly dried food, things that need to be cooked with water, and not water, primarily because it's far more expensive to deliver a truckload of water than it is several truckloads of food. So it's a cost saving measure to deliver them dry food and not water, when in reality, a human being needs water far more urgently than food in order to stay alive. Mm-hmm. So again, I think to your point, if this were really about aid, their priorities and their execution would be far different.
Well, and it's also the timing. I mean, to go back a second, from October 2023 to May 2025, there's been at times full blockades of food and water and other resources like medicine. So if you don't have access to water, and a lot of the desalination plants have been destroyed, almost all of them from what I understand, and all your water has been cut off that was going into Gaza from Israel, you're now drinking dirty water. And when you drink dirty water, you're more likely to contact something like dysentery or something like that. It gives you a stomach disease. And if you can't get access to antibiotics, people start dying. And this is something that we've seen from other blockades that happened in the Middle East. For example, the American blockade of Iraq in the 1990s, 500,000 people died from that, according to estimates of humanitarian organizations. And a lot of that was from diseases contracted by not having access to medicines and ways to purify water. You have these, repeated claims of indiscriminate firing into crowds. You have the lack of water. You have the kind of process by which to do this. All these concerns going on with that, and the response back is this guy can't be trusted. This kind of, it drops the mask. It reveals what's going on here, which is a strategy, something that they're doing that they want to keep hidden, that they don't want exposed, so they attack the messenger.
Right. Well, and isn't it, as you mentioned, typically, it's the UN that would come in and provide aid like this, right? And obviously in the prior paradigm, there were 100x more aid stations for these people than there are now. Why do they have a private contractor and they're doing it? Particularly one that, according to Tony Aguilar, seems to have very little logistical competence or proficiency at actually doing their job.
Yeah, it's so all the aid stations get shut down after October 7th. And then they lock down Gaza. And immediately there were concerns at the time that, well, how are, Gaza has always been under control of Israel as like, and they describe it this way. I'm just repeating the description by the people who are most concerned about this from a humanitarian point of view as like a giant concentration camp, a massive outdoor prison. And with that, for example, we have stories going all the way back to the mid 2000s about putting Gazans on a diet, meaning making a calculation of the total amount of Gazans and the caloric needs, and then they can control what comes in and out, right, of Gaza. Not completely. Obviously, weapons are smuggled in and other things, but you do have this phenomena of them controlling all of the resources. So when it comes to, and getting to your question, was why is it being done this way? Why isn't it being done on a greater scale? Well, that's because there's a specific, and potentially, this is once again theory, because this isn't what Israel's saying. This is just what people are putting onto Israel, saying, well, why are you doing it this way? And then when you mesh it with other comments, such as we need to move them into certain areas for their safety, out of the cities and out of these areas to these other camps, so that we can, keep Gaza, we can investigate and like bomb Hamas in the cities and get those people out so they're safe. Well, now they're using food to draw them out of those areas and those supplies so that they can then control where the population's at and then supposedly, do the operation against Hamas. Now, what's interesting here is that these aid stations are also where active operations are going, which is a war crime. So the operation is called Gideon's Chariots, and they are operating out, according to this Green Beret veteran, they're operating out of these aid sites with IDF combat units. Now, how this should work in the laws of war is that you actually have different aid sites controlled by humanitarian foundations, and your military should be somewhere else, right? But they're using these aid sites as bait, in theory, to draw Hamas fighters out because they need food too, and then they're prosecuting their war against Hamas amongst that crowd. That's why that gives a clear motive to why not assign, why fire over them? Well, because you're trying to draw Hamas fighters out. You're trying to get them to fire back at you so that you can then prosecute a war against Hamas.
So you mentioned, that was allegedly their goal. And earlier you mentioned that there might be some other motives in play. What do you think those are?
Well, what Israel says is like, this is all has to do with just how dangerous it is there, right? Israel's case is, well, they're sending all this aid, but Hamas is stealing it all. So Benjamin Netanyahu went on the Nelk Boys and basically just poo-pooed the entire question. They said, well, and it wasn't a very good interview. I will join the chorus of people condemning the Nelk Boys for kind of giving a softball interview to Benjamin Netanyahu, although they have been trying to make up for that by bringing other voices on to their audience. But when they asked about it, he basically says, well, Hamas is bad and evil, and they hate their own people, and therefore they are just stealing all the food to create sympathy in the West from them, so that so there's pressure on Israel to stop the war, to stop prosecuting the war against Hamas. So that's the supposed cause of the starvation. It's kind of difficult to believe when you look at the aid station shutdown and just what that means, right? When you have this space, this long, area with no infrastructure to get around at, how do you move food around, right? You got to carry it physically. So when you cut from 400 to 4, of course, there's going to be areas that are left out of that. And then when you look at the consistent bombing campaigns that are still ongoing, it was only a couple of weeks ago that an entire village was just completely wiped out. Mostly Christian village in Gaza. So and this is a small one, more rural, but even in situations like that, and those people might not have needed as much aid. They could have had more agriculture or something like that locally. But now all those people, if they survived that, are now running around homeless and trying to get access to the resources they need to survive. So, this use of starvation as a war tactic is also a war crime, right? It's also not, and keep in mind, when we talk about this in terms of war crime, this is the things that we put together after World War II. Says we're never going to let this happen again, right? The U.S. did a starvation blockade in World War One. It was terrible, and it resulted in very bad outcomes, right? AKA World War II, right? And you used starvation blockades and other circumstances surrounding the war. I mean, obviously, when you look at the Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Dresden, all these other areas, we after World War II said, hey guys, we can't do that anymore. We can't have total war. We can't use these tactics anymore. So what we're going to do is we're going to establish a UN charter, and then all the nations of the world will agree that we're not going to do this anymore. And that's going to be enforced by the Security Council, and it's going to be enforced by the goodwill and reputation amongst nations. But the problem is that we're now just saying, except for now, because America just denies that it's happening, and then blocks everything on the Security Council that might actually put pressure on Israel to do anything about it. And therefore, even though they're signatories, it really has no consequence. There's no teeth to it.
Right. Didn't France just come out recently and make some condemnation of Israel?
Yeah.
I know a few nations have. And I remember North Korea actually, like maybe just yesterday, made a similar condemnation as well, as I recall.
Yeah. And honestly, the people who have really been at the vanguard of this has been Ireland. And Ireland has had, been at the very forefront from the very beginning saying, guys, this is, we got to be really careful here. Guys, this looks really bad, and dealing with it as a state of actual play, right? Not as what we want it to be, but as relating to it as a set of facts that you are trying to contend with. That a country that has complete control over this geographic area that is not a country, that is, even though they pulled out in 2005, has no real autonomy or ability to project its own sovereignty. Seeing this as like the more equivalent to a Native American reservation always clarifies, right? I mean, these are the people who are in that area. The Nakba happens. They get pushed into Gaza. Most of them are refugees or second or third generation refugees from the original founding of the state of Israel. And a lot of those people are then just completely captive of the Israeli security state. Ireland has long had like a lot more innate resistance to that concept because of their experience with the British. And they've from the very beginning been saying this. Now, this week, the Secretary of State, and at least the State Department, has been issued some investigations into Ireland and what they can do to try to box out Ireland for their resistance on this issue of Israel-Palestine.
Very interesting, because there has been additional pushback against Americans who may disagree with Israel's practices in persecuting this war and, trying to prevent Americans from boycotting Israeli businesses as well, right? So there's sort of this, seems like a back and forth here.
Oh, yeah. There's crazy controversy that happened this week. So the Department of Homeland Security issued a policy. I mean, basically, part of the agreement to get funds says, basically, in short, if you boycott Israel, you don't get aid for disaster support anymore. So even though most states in the union have already passed anti-BDS, this is divestment or boycott divestment measures, saying that the state cannot participate in BDS. We discovered actually not too long ago, a couple months ago, that American trade policy also has anti-BDS stuff in it, basically saying we will not have open trade deals with countries that will allow for, boycott and divestment of companies who are related to Israel. So like the anti-BDS stuff is deeply, deeply ingrained into the state architecture. This stuff is so we know that this is systematic across the federal government, this anti-BDS point of view. And now, the State Department comes out, or at least the Department of Homeland Security comes out and says, we won't give disaster relief to any state that has a BDS practices and what they allow as a state government. That was immediately went huge online to the point where there was eventually a backlash and like a gaslighting saying from a spokesperson at the Department of Homeland Security saying that that's all nonsense. It was always just part of our anti-discrimination practices. you can't discriminate against Israeli companies because it's racist to do so, or something like that is what they're trying to suggest. And it's always been their policy to be able to say, no, you can't discriminate against Israel.
So it's just DEI for Israel is really what's going on.
Yes, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that all over the place. DEI for Israel, for Jewish people in general. I mean, it's really quite an interesting moment, considering the fact that the MAGA movement was really built on anti-DEI.
Absolutely. It's interesting to me that this feels like they're losing the grip on the narrative in a very meaningful way. And it's sort of like sand slipping through their fingers. The tighter they try to control it, the more it looks bad, the more it slips through their fingers, the more that it gives real credence to the objections that people have with the way things are going on in Gaza. And it's not helping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there was an interesting tweet by Martyr that was saying, like, all these lies that are happening with this, like the sullying of the character of Tony Aguilar to, just saying, well, it's just there's a myth happening. This is just to buy time, right? And that's the thing is, I don't want to believe. At no point do I want to believe that a first world country like Israel, full of people who have bachelor's degrees and go to nightclubs and have a democratic society, are capable of an ethnic cleansing, right? You don't want to believe that, but it kind of has happened in the past, right? Democracies can get so bent up around a moral cause that they are capable of tremendous evil. The neocons were wrong. It isn't that we have a democracy and all social problems are solved. It's actually that human nature is human nature. And what are the bounds on that? What can we do to control that? So when we look at like the international laws of war, that's just a formulation of actually an age-old practice. The things that were done by reputation amongst generals in prior ages are now being done by states, and states are supposedly committing to these laws of war. And we're just simply abandoning these things for one country in particular. And, when you look at all that architecture, you're sitting there saying, like, I don't want to believe that this is happening, but man, does it sure look like it. The longer this goes on, the more you're like, the worst critics are turning out to be right again and again and again over time. And, it was 2 years ago, we were talking about, man, well, what if this is an ethnic cleansing? That would be terrible. And now they're like, well, what if we take them out of Gaza and we put them in a camp, a concentrated area that's a camp? And you're like, well, we got to concentrate the population together. Like, what are we talking about here, guys? Did we not apply that word anymore? The sensible word that we're talking about, concentration camp, to that because we support Israel at that point. I mean, like, it's a word game that is tremendously destructive. And he notes that, like, Tony Aguilar does in his thing, that the dehumanization of the Palestinian people in this process of referring to them as a zombie horde. Well, I bet it does look like a zombie horde when you got a bunch of starving women and children and old men trying to get in for food. I bet it looks terrible. But instead of meeting it with compassion, they're meeting it with, contempt.
Yeah, and this has always been the position of the United States, in the myth of United States as savior, as preventer of ethnic cleansing, of, sort of this humanitarian force in the world, the whole mythos that exists around US aid and all of that stuff. Like, that's obviously not accurate, but that we're the good guys, that we come in and we prevent these things from happening. And now we're actively aiding and abetting this practice, or at very least turning a blind eye to what's really going on. And in a lot of cases, trying to run cover for it, it seems like, which is just insane to me. And I think it's un-American. And I don't know, where the average Israeli citizen stands on this issue, but I have to imagine that there's probably a large constituency of people in Israel who don't agree with what's going on, just the same as there is in the United States. It's the government that's perpetrating these things. It's the government that has these aims. So what is the government of Israel's goal here? I mean, what do they want with Gaza at this point?
Well, I mean, it does look like there's a buildup of troops along the Gaza border for another like incursion into Gaza to like militarily control Gaza. There was a New York Times report that suggested that was true. That the statements from Trump saying Gaza's Bibi's problem, pretty much it's Israel's problem. He's not going to tell them what to do when it comes to it, although we should do something about the humanitarian problem, right? So there's a step there, because America is not directly involved. There's like this plausible deniability where we can step back and say we don't have any culpability here, but we are at every point keeping Israel from having any amount of accountability on the UN Security Council or anything else for their internal domestic practice. And it just shows the lie of everything, right? So the way that the pro-Israel supporters have been justifying this war is to cast it as if it was a one country invading another. But if you always had control of that other country, if you can control their seas, if you could exports, everything about them, were they a country in any meaningful sense of the term? Or were they an Indian reservation? Is that clear? Is that closer to it? And with even less rights than we give Indian reservations in America or Canada or these other places where they have full voting rights within the domestic policy of the United States. You know, like that is where we're sitting here saying like this internal domestic policy is actually really important because we've been funding it and we've been keeping you from any consequence of your behavior and actions. That creates a moral dilemma, you know, amongst the supporters that they simply are just denying that it has any credence or ways to think about it that are important for the American people to consider. And that's disastrous, right? Because for our standing on the world stage is now maybe not right. Maybe right now the hegemony is saying, no, if you BDS or if you don't like Israel, we're going to come after you with the Treasury Department or the Homeland Security Department or whatever. But in 10 years, what's it going to mean? Right. I mean, and keeping in mind that one of the major causes, at least one of the major motivations for the people who attacked us on 9/11 was our actions in Serbia and that seemed at the time to be very narrow and contained. Our actions in Iraq, which didn't get a lot of press coverage, which was really behind the scenes in the West, but was very important to the Middle East. These things have long-term consequences that cannot be predicted. So what Americans will pay was probably going to be future terrorism, especially if you starve millions of people and then say like, well, I mean, it's a domestic policy. We don't have anything to do with it. And just deny that it's happening and all these things. It simply cannot happen that this is going to be costless. It's going to be very costly in the long run.
Yeah. And the sad part of that is that with increased domestic terrorism, well, not domestic, but terrorism in the United States as a result of our actions here, that is in and of itself going to increase the power of the state because, of course, there will be responses to that. There will be increased security measures or whatever there will be, just like there were after 9/11. You know, this is a perfect example of the actions of the state existing only to perpetuate and expand the power of the state as well.
Yes. I mean, never again should you ever believe the interventionists when they say we're a benevolent hegemony. Right. Because they say like, oh, well, look, none of these Europe hasn't gone to war with each other for, since World War II. And look that we've been all established this. But underneath that is a pile of bodies of people across the third world and the second world who have been at sacrifice for American corporations and for American hegemony. And this is not a sustainable situation, not to mention it's bankrupting us, not to mention all these other things. So when you look at the way this is the one-way ratcheting of the system is constantly pressuring for bigger and bigger of a government. That's why the old national conservative lie of like, well, in order to fight international communism, we have to have a totalitarian state at home. That's why it's such a lie. We don't have to do any of that stuff. This is all by choice. This isn't the thing we're forced into. We don't have to be the world hegemon. We can be a country like every other country. And they're just simply uninterested in that transition. And unfortunately, it appears that the Donald Trump administration is not taking that transition seriously as well. I mean, they will signal that their realism in the multipolarity of the moment, but they're also completely uninterested in what appears to be, Israel's actions here and how destabilizing it's going to be in the long run for the Middle East. Not saying that therefore they should just do nothing, but saying rather that they should force a new solution, a different direction. They don't have to be taking the direction of Benjamin Netanyahu, which is interesting too, because when you look at this, what happened after the December break. Now, remember a couple episodes ago, we talked about how there was an action that Thomas Massey was going to bring a resolution to investigate the Epstein files. At the very end, and Speaker Johnson ended this early for the October recess, a week early. And we speculated, and a lot of the internet speculated, because he didn't want to take a vote on the Epstein files, because he had got enough co-signers to probably bring it directly to the floor. What happened to a bunch of those congressmen during the recess? Did they go back to their home districts?
I don't know what happened.
A bunch of them went to Israel.
Really?
Including
what an odd thing to do.
Including Representative Troy Downing. Took a nice trip to Israel, where they got to speak to Israeli politicians.
Who is a Montana state representative, not a member of Congress, correct?
No, he's a member of Congress. He's a member of Congress for the Eastern District.
Oh, my mistake.
Yeah. So like that's crazy. Like they didn't go back to their home districts. They went to Israel, right? It's a watershed moment. It's the meme of the moment, saying like, wait a minute, guys, are we really prioritizing American interests here? Is American interest to support this state that might be conducting an ethnic cleansing right now? Not going back to the home districts to answer questions about the Epstein files when they're not going to vote for that. They're out there getting the talking points from a state that is currently starving potentially millions of people.
Is it ignorance on the part of these representatives? Is it complicity? Is it, they are too swept up in the machinations of the system that they can possibly act in a way that would comply with their own morals? What's going on? Like, why is this happening?
Yeah. So this is answered a lot of different ways, right? Online, you're going to find people saying, well, this just shows that our government's, controlled by Israel. And there's obviously forces that pressure that direction, right? AIPAC being one of them and other ones. And it is true that this trip is supported by a foundation with relations that's branched out of AIPAC, in order to encourage, American-Israeli relations. I think it's hard for people to understand. And you got to think, probably the closest analogy to someone who's never been to DC is think about COVID in the first 2 weeks of COVID. Right? Those first 2 weeks, the amount of social consensus that was whoa, something really bad's happening, right, was there. DC is like that 24/7, 100% of the time. There is constantly a narrative, a dynamic, a thing that's happening all around you. This culture that is constantly pressuring in one direction that has already embedded in it all the right answers from the right smart people. So the degree to which supporting our number one ally, Israel, is just an unquestioned axiom with no discussion or questioning. The fact that there's anyone who does that is the weird thing. Let me give you an example. This is a personal story. So in 2013, I was in DC, working for a congressman in his office on the Hill. And I was the new guy there, right? I was one of the few actual Montanans in the Montana representatives delegation, had lived there recently and done things there recently, actually from there, born there. And this was right during, it happened while I was there, the Snowden leaks happened. And the way that everyone around us orientated to this, everyone around me really orientated to this was immediate. Everyone already knew, though, this is terrible for national security. And obviously he's putting people's lives at risk. And obviously this is, necessary for our safety. That was the immediate reaction. Meanwhile, all my friends in Montana were activating this oh my God, the government's spying on all of us. And look how unconstitutional this is. Look how far way outside the bounds of FISA this is. And look how, insane it was that every telecommunications company was co-opted by the NSA to systematically just collect all of our data all the time and store it in giant data houses so that they could do post hoc crime investigations into anyone if they needed to. Think about that. The way DC reacted was DC's culture, and it's the aggregate of a system that defers to the executive that believes that the authority and power of the government comes from the executive. It doesn't come from Congress, who is responsive to the people, right? The way that the federal government is structured is supposed to be that Congress then, passes the laws and enforces the president to enforce the laws, to actually do the things that they say they can do. And there's these powers that the Congress has to do that. That's not how it works in DC. It works the other way around. The security architecture is number one, and that's where all the authority comes from. You got to defer to the generals because they're the ones who really know what's going on the ground. Even though you have access to all the secure documents too, you're not going to do that because you have to go fundraise, Congressman. That entire arrangement of powers flipped so that when the Pentagon says, no, Israel's our most important ally, if the congressman can't say, well, what treaty did they sign to make them our most important ally? Like, just answer that question.
Yeah, and what exactly are they doing for us?
Exactly. What do we get out of this allegiance to each other?
It seems like we get less money spent on American priorities. We get less security because we're stirring up potential future terrorism by the way they're treating this population with our blessing, at least from the government. I mean, it seems like we only get bad things from this so-called best ally.
It seems to me that the only answer to the question that solves it is actually closer to the way that Thomas Massey and forget his name. He's from Michigan. He's actually Palestinian. He joined the Libertarian Party before he left Congress. What was his name? Forgetting it right now.
I don't recall.
I almost had it. Austin. No, not Austin. Justin Amash. The way that Justin Amash orientates to this, which is that there's no incentive to care what everyday people want or care about, or what the priorities are, as long as the speaker controls the entirety of the House. As long as there's no ability to bring forward and debate on the merits bills. You have to disrupt that underlying power dynamic that expresses the will upward to DC if you're going to have upward pressure on DC, right? Even if, this support for the war in Gaza is dropping down to 30%, there'll be no fundamental change because DC doesn't care about it. They don't care about what the American people think because there's no upward pressure. You have to change the rules on Congress first before you can get any of that organic upward bound that allows people to actually care about the things that they want to care about. Because we didn't ask at any point what Montanans thought about Snowden. I was the only one in the office that brought up, hey, by the way, Montana has a privacy written into our state constitution. It's kind of a big deal in Montana. Everyone was like, whoa, wow, that's an interesting thought. But it's not there.
Yeah, maybe we should ask the voters what they think.
Yeah. Right.
Well, but this to me seems to be a bit of a catch-22, because if in order to change Congress or change the priorities of Congress to be more bottom up, we have to change the rules of Congress. Congress writes the rules for Congress. Do we have to just vote everyone out and replace them with people who actually respect the Constitution and respect the procedure of the way the government is supposed to work?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's the priorities of the American people. Do they want their voice to be heard or not? And will they prioritize that in an election cycle, or will they get distracted by stuff like, oh, well, that person said this thing 10 years ago and it was naughty. You know what I mean? Like, what are voters going to care about? And until voters actually care about that underlying question of like, do we actually serve the interests of the American people? That's unlikely to happen without a representation of candidates that actually talk about the real problem. Which is how
it's more salient to talk about transgender athletes than it is to talk about Israeli influence over U.S. policy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's so difficult to win on that. No, Thomas Massey, right? I mean, like they've dropped $1 million, $3 million into just negative ads on him already. 3 donors, all of which happen to be related to or close to the Israel First contingency of MAGA.
Mm-hmm.
So do
you think that's going to work?
Will Thomas Massey lose? I don't know. I mean, he is fundraising well. He didn't go to Israel. He's back in his district campaigning probably right now. So I struggle to think that they're going to be successful with that. Especially, it's difficult to remove incumbents no matter what, right? No matter how much money you spend. I mean, incumbents just have such a tremendous opportunity, such tremendous tailwinds always, that, it's difficult to really contend with, whether or not you can spend enough money to make a difference in that district.
Yeah, well, and especially with somebody like Thomas Massey, who is just seems so likable. And I mean, even having gotten to meet him very briefly at Freedom Fest when you and I were there, I mean, it's just a kind guy who seems to obviously have the priorities of his district at the front of his mind as opposed to other things. Mm-hmm. You would hope that a guy like that would really be able to create lasting rapport with the people that elect him, and that they would see through the BS of, this money coming in from all over the country, from the Adelsons and whomever else, trying to unseat him because he's not on board with the prevailing, Israel first narrative.
Right. I hope that's true. And that has been true historically. Like Ron Paul took a lot of votes. Now we're in a different moment too, right? Because we're a more nationalist time now than we've ever been before. Like the narrative brings everything up to this national picture because of the internet, even more so than it did in the past, which is interesting to me. You wouldn't necessarily guess that. Prior to the breadth and depth of the internet that we have now. So I don't know that. But
it still seems. Well, it still seems to me, though, like this narrative that is so salient it's not positive in the direction of the pro-Israel lobby, right? Mm-hmm. It's obviously very negative. As we said from the outset, only 32% of the U.S. backs Israel's military action in Gaza. It doesn't seem like any amount of money trying to unseat an incumbent who opposes that, who is in line with the majority of Americans, is going to actually work. I mean, I pray that it doesn't. I pray that it continues to go the other direction, frankly, because people have legitimate concerns, and the fact that our government's just ignoring those and pressing on, like there's on a sinking ship is what it feels like. It feels like a total losing battle. And I wonder, like, what is it going to take for that dam to break and for this narrative to totally lose the credibility that it seems to be clinging to at this moment?
Yeah, I mean, what Thomas Massey is going to need to do, because this by party ID still has Republicans overall at 71%. So when I said sub 50%, I meant amongst young demographics for this. At total, it's still at 71% because boomers are a big part of that population. So the question is can you get those older boomers on your side, or are Democrats going to move over and vote for Thomas Massey in the primary? That seems to be the other one. So interesting.
What do you think the likelihood is of that?
It depends on how much Democrats really care about this. You know what I mean? Like, or do they care more about power? Right. And that's demonstrative, right? I mean, the Democrats didn't care about the Epstein files until they're starting to embarrass Trump. And now they care about the Epstein files for some reason. So like it has nothing to do with, and you see that from the New York Times story this week, Wall Street Journal, all that narrative is all just how do we use the Epstein files to embarrass Trump? Not anything to do with disclosure. Has nothing to do with actually getting into his intelligence ties or any of that kind of stuff. It's all about just trying to smear people with the story, which is why Trump is not wanting to release them and therefore feeds the whole non-release. So keep in mind, you cannot hate this corporate press process enough, right? It has nothing to do with truth, restraining the intelligence agencies, or actually trying to find out if we are using pedophiles in order to get compromise on our own elites. That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with just embarrassing things so that you can control the big stick, the federal government. And that's the giant black hole. This whole thing's a giant black hole, but there it is for that. But yeah, it is, this is a terrible situation, guys. This is absolutely horrendous. I mean, we are massively in debt. This federal government cannot pay for itself. New stories about T-bills are happening this week on treasury sales and how that's all going down. Will we be able to refinance in time before the debt bomb? Who knows? I mean, we're in a dire strait. And as much as I want to, there's so many things competing for our attention and time. This is the substrate. This is the underlying thing that is driving all this. Because when you look at the Israel's effect on our foreign policy, what that's had on our debt, all these things are all interrelated. in a very critical way. That is the DC culture. Until we disrupt that bottom up by American people caring enough about it, nothing's going to change, and we're going to go bankrupt. Yeah.
Well, I can't really argue with that. On that cheerful note,
yeah.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Hey guys, look, these are dire times, but what we need is more voices that are willing to come out and speak the truth, and we're trying to do that on this podcast. If you could please just like, comment, subscribe, drop into our Discord, check us out, and share this podcast with your friends, because we need the message to get out that this is real, that this is happening. It's happening on the side of the globe, and I didn't see it seems remote and distant. That doesn't affect you. It does affect you. A close friend of mine recently said, like, I just don't care about the Gaza thing. I just don't want it to be an important issue. It is the driver of the national debt, our foreign policy, right? I mean, don't get me wrong. There's all kinds of social spending problems too. But these are things of choice that have nothing to do with the safety and security of Americans. They have everything to do with the foreign interests, a foreign government driving us in this direction. And we really, if we're going to be America first, we have to do it now. Now has to be the time. It has to be a strong signal against the Trump administration to say, no, you have to take a look at this if you actually want to save the country or not.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we appreciate you. Please leave a comment. Let us know what you think of this story, and drop into that Discord. Link is in the description below. For David Rand, I'm Joe Sheehan. This is Human Reaction. We'll see you in the next one.
Peace.